Hello, beautiful, and welcome to the Art of Actualization. This podcast is all about making your dreams real, and as I'm iterating on myself personally, there's usually something standing between me and that next better version of me, right? Otherwise, I would already be her, obviously. And right now, and often in the past, that hurdle is internal, as much as I hate to admit it. And I know we're really quick to blame others and the system itself, but we can't change the system or the behavior of other people overnight. And if we could, I really believe we would find that they're not our only issues. So, today, what we're going to talk about is getting really honest with ourselves and working on finding the bottleneck or the limiting factor that's holding us back in our lives and resolving it. And this can be a really daunting task, but it's really worth the effort. And whether what you uncover is internal or not, we're really lucky in that we can often change something internal to counteract even external factors. So you might cringe at the thought as you think about big problems like the patriarchy and racism and late stage capitalism, and that's really fair. But we're going to get more specific than that in order to uncover what adapting could look like in our lives. And this is really challenging, I know, because we get so upset when we're thinking of those bigger issues. And there was a time when my financial insecurity was my big bottleneck, right? I wanted to be independent from my parents, and that felt really hard. And there were plenty of outside forces to blame, there still are. But that made it difficult to sit with myself and to find out what I could do for myself. But when I finally did, I found the FIRE movement, which stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early, and it changed my life. Now, I don't necessarily adhere to exactly what is described in the FIRE movement, but it helped me learn a lot about personal finance. It empowered me to feel more in control of my own finances. There are also times when what seems like your biggest bottleneck, the thing keeping you from flowing freely at maximum capacity, actually isn't the bottleneck at all. I quit a job once thinking that that's why I was constantly sick and tired, but it was actually a medical issue. And I had been refusing to admit to myself that I might have to give up gluten because bread and pasta felt like such an important part of my lifestyle and of my joy that I was convinced it was anything else but that. I couldn't possibly be so unlucky as to have to give up gluten. But when I finally did give it up, I had way more energy, less bloating, and I stopped catching colds all the time as well. And this issue turned out to be something that was out of my control, but I could manage it better by understanding what the problem was. Misattributing your issues to the wrong cause might happen, and it's not the end of the world. Trying one solution really does get you that much closer to the right solution, even if that sounds cliche. Evaluating the situation and taking action on it is the most important part. Until you do that, it doesn't even matter what the problem is because you definitely aren't solving it. So, what I like to do is write out all of the things that seem to be stopping me from reaching my goals and see if there's a theme. There usually is, and that's probably your bottleneck. Right now, I'm working on my energy levels and resting more effectively because it became clear to me that the amount of rest I've been needing to function, recently at least, has been holding me back from a lot of the things I want to do. Things on my list were how much sleep I needed, how long it takes me to wind down at night. The quality of my sleep isn't very good. I don't do well before 10 or 11 in the morning, and those are really big, obvious issues, right? But maybe you're saying no to things that you haven't done before. You're feeling stagnant in your career, your friendships feel like they're fading, and you don't have real hobbies. That might be an openness issue, right? So your bottleneck could be a scarcity mindset, social anxiety, low financial security. Maybe in the reverse of the openness issue, you say yes so much that you don't have time for the things you need to do to move forward. The first step is figuring out what internal shift would solve the most problems possible so that you know where to focus your efforts. Then you'll have to sort out what those efforts should be. There are a few different angles you can come at these problems from, and I think exploring as many angles as possible to start is the best approach. If your limiting factor is money, social capital, energy, or some kind of resource like that, you need to figure out how to get more of it first and foremost. You cannot solely budget away a lack of resources. as nice as that would be. You have to make a list of ways that you could get more of this thing. And don't shy away from silly ideas when you're brainstorming. I've said that before, and I think it makes the process go so much more smoothly, especially for things that hit close to home. For more money, you probably want to build up a less labor intensive side hustle and ask for a raise at your day job. But in the short term, maybe you also get some bartending work on the side or you offer pet sitting services. If you do need more social connections, are you making a public appearance once a week, twice a week? That's things like going to events, happy hours, spending time in a local cafe, and so on. For this, I also really recommend episode 3 of this podcast where we talk about making new friends. Hopefully, I'll be making an episode on each of the resources I mentioned since I think they're all really important and pretty common issues when we're actualizing our dream lives. But they're not up yet, so stay tuned. If it's energy that you can't get enough of, how can you rest better? Maybe you need a bedtime routine that really helps you shut down from your hectic work days. Are there any activities that make you feel more energized? Maybe you need to add those to your schedule more, especially in the mornings. I'm awful at mornings, but I'm trying to pull myself together to start taking a Pilates class first thing because that beats a runner's high for me, personally. Whatever that is for you, add it to your schedule where you'll need the boost. I would also be remiss not to mention seeking external help. I check in with my doctor about possible causes for my energy issues whenever I see her. This is something I might talk about in other episodes, but I work with her to get blood tests when I think I might be deficient in something because of my dietary restrictions and issues like that. If you can see a dietitian, that might help with things like energy and fitness as well. And there are a lot of bottleneck issues that could just require some good therapy. If you're insecure or you have past trauma causing PTSD or even just limiting beliefs, a good therapist can also help you learn better communication skills if you feel like that's an area that's holding you back. Finding a good therapist could really change things for you in a lot of ways, even when you don't feel like you explicitly have a mental health issue. So I think that's really valuable to consider. There are also life coaches, dating coaches, career coaches, and so on. A whole industry, basically, of people who just want to help you with whatever specific issue you're facing. So if you do still feel overwhelmed by your bottleneck after this episode and after trying some of the things you brainstorm, there's absolutely nothing wrong with reaching out to those people. That's literally why they are there. Another huge shift for certain issues could be learning a new skill, going back to school, or getting a new certification. I love to learn new things, so I'm a little bit biased towards this as a solution. As I said, a therapist can help with coping and social skills if that's what's holding you back, but you could also learn a new skill for work or for a side project. You might just take on a new hobby if your bottleneck is a lack of joie de vivre or you just want a new way to connect with other people. Widening the bottleneck so that more fits through can take a lot of different forms, but hopefully you can brainstorm a good set of options for yourself. I like to keep my lists in an AnyType note. This is just a note taking app that's sort of like Notion, but you could use any note taking app. And then I just add to it when I think of new things and refer back to it whenever I need to. For you, you might use a journal or even just keep a list on your refrigerator, honestly, but I'm always misplacing things, so I like to have a digital copy. At the same time as you're finding ways to widen your bottleneck, I also recommend finding ways around the issue, especially if there's no quick solution, as there often isn't. This podcast was actually born from this. I wanted to be able to reach people, help them, and maybe even build community, even during periods of time when it might be harder for me to get out of bed or do the kind of work I'm personally used to doing. And I don't want to ever feel like I have to step back from living my life in a meaningful way just because I'm tired. And if you're being held back right now, I'm sure you feel me, you understand what I'm talking about. If your problem is financial security, an obvious example of narrowing the flow or going around the issue is going to be when you assess your spending and make changes. I think most of us are spending a decent chunk of change on something that we don't actually get any value from. I'm personally really passionate about how often this is true with cars. I think there are a lot of people who have convinced themselves that they need a car when they really don't, or a nice car when a plain one would do. And of course, if you're in certain industries, maybe you're a real estate agent, or if cars are what bring you joy in life, this makes more sense. But for a lot of people, that's not the case. And the average American spends about $12,000 per year on their car, which could go towards something they actually care about instead. So I'm not advising you to do any strict budgeting unless your situation really calls for that. But whatever your bottleneck is, what are you trying to push through that bottleneck that just isn't actually benefiting you? Whether it's financial ROI or emotional satisfaction, what are you trying to do with your limited resource that isn't even benefiting you personally? You're not getting anything out of it. And then the other part of this is finding ways to get what you want that fit better. Like I mentioned with this podcast, right? So you might not have to remove something, but in the case of the car, instead of walking everywhere or having a fancy car, you find a middle grade. Maybe you downgrade your car or you start taking Ubers or, hey, maybe an actual taxi cab. And then you're spending less, but you're still using private transportation. With issues of insecurity and limiting beliefs, you can't let this concept become your excuse for not pushing yourself. I don't want you to say, well, I have this bottleneck, so I'm just not putting anything through it. And then you shrink your life down just because you have those beliefs. That's obviously not a solution, and that's probably the problem you're trying to solve to begin with. But what this could look like in that case is a sort of exposure therapy, right? If what you want is really big and it feels impossible because of some mental block, try something in between where you are and where you're going. Work your way up to that. If you were afraid of flying, for example, you might take a short flight to somewhere regional and work your way up to be able to have that Euro summer or international lifestyle that you're dreaming of. If you're afraid of public speaking, you can practice it in a safe environment like a Toastmasters club to start getting your stride with it. Or even simpler, you could join a silent book club where everyone just describes the book that they're reading to the group. Something small like that where it doesn't even feel like public speaking, but it is, and that will move you up slowly. If you feel like you don't belong or you're unworthy of certain neighborhoods or establishments, you might just go to a cafe or a restaurant nearby and get a little dessert to dip your toes in. You're going to solve whatever problem is limiting you, but I don't want you to put your whole life on hold while you're in the process of working on that. And I think planning around the issue by coming up with these little compromises in the short term is a good way to keep things pushing. Again, depending on where you are in your journey, this could feel really impossible, which is why I want you to include silly ideas in your list when you're brainstorming. Don't get weighed down by reality, okay? Until you are actually choosing from those items on your list, reality doesn't matter. That's the next step, though. Once you do have this list of ways to widen your bottleneck or solve your problem, and you list a few ways that you can keep enjoying your life while that limitation exists, you're going to pick a few things on that list to actually act on. I recommend choosing 3 to 5 small, easy steps like taking vitamins or journaling, and 1 or 2 big undertakings that won't fall into place right away. Maybe these are things like therapy, booking a trip, working with a doctor, moving houses, or switching careers, big changes like that. And those are things that will have a bit of a barrier to entry, so you don't want to take on too many at once. 1 or 2 is plenty of those bigger things. And then you work on all of those things over the next few months. Build your small habits and create a plan to make your big changes. Once you've been working on those for a while, hopefully you'll see their impact. But if you don't, that's data, right? Now you know. So make a list again of all those things that are limiting you. Start from the top because maybe your biggest issue isn't the same issue anymore. Maybe you didn't notice, but something else moved ahead in the race, or maybe this did actually get better. Maybe you actually solved your problem and now you're going to have a new issue. Right? So make that list of things that are feeling like they're limiting you again. Find the common thread, the biggest issue among there, the theme, right? And maybe it's still the same, like I said, but maybe it's new. Hopefully it's new. That would be great, right? But then you're going to brainstorm new solutions with the information you have now collected. So if it's the same, now you know that these solutions that you tried didn't work and you have to brainstorm new solutions. And once you've taken those steps, you can get a better idea of what kind of solutions might work. So it is really helpful to have that data. Making your life bigger and realizing your dreams like this can be an iterative process, so it probably won't all fall into place with one fell swoop. But it is more than worth it to make the effort. And even going through this simple framework one time honestly could change your whole life. But it's just that continuing to go through it over and over again, every 6 months, every year, whatever the timeline is for you, is going to be so much more impactful. So I urge you to keep doing it over and over and over again. Just make this part of your lifestyle, right? We're always getting better all the time. And that's one of the great things about life. So, what do you think your biggest bottleneck or your personal limitation is? If you're brave, tell me in the comments. You could also DM me, I'd love to hear. Make sure to share this podcast episode with anyone you know who is feeling limited or overwhelmed because I really want this to help anyone that it can, as many people as possible, right? And then, of course, subscribe so that we can all turn our dream lives into a reality together. I am excited to talk to you again in 2 weeks. I hope that you have a great time until then. Love you. Bye.